Self-talk and visualization are two other vital tools in his toolbox. They help you push beyond 40% of your capability and into 70 to 80% of your capability, your full potential, or closer to your full potential. He said, "Self-talk and visualization are two keys to my success." In this video, Goggins talks about his what-if self-talk and how he visualizes.
Visualizing is my biggest tool of life. I'm able to visualize and dream like nobody's business. And I know that I can create a vision that many people can't. I started being able to take negative shit and be happy. And this whole, I say what if a lot, it sounds corny and it sounds weak, but it's true. I was like, man, what story would it be if my fucking fat, dumb, lying to be friends with people, insecure ass can overcome this shit? And that what if mentality, like that dreamer mentality, just would always fuel me. It would just fuel me, man. What if I can be a SEAL, man? What if I can go from running a quarter of a fucking mile, now I run 205 miles. What if I can go? What if I can go? And what if, how would that feel? These different visualizations, how I visualize in my self-talk, it became so nasty and dirty that, so it became from being defeated to like, man, all right, motherfucker, maybe tomorrow we can go 0.75. It just became this different mindset. No one want to do this shit. You're the baddest motherfucker around. You're the baddest motherfucker ever lived. And I just kept fueling me with the right kind of message that I needed to hear that I was never telling myself. And through time, it became reality. I failed, I go back to scratch. I use some positive motivation. I have like one day where I'm like fucking defeated. But I started realizing this is part of the process. This is part of the journey. I had to realize this is part of my process versus just saying, like I used to, I'm just not good enough. If I'm not good enough, we always say that shit. I'm just not good enough, and then we try something else. I'm gonna fucking make myself good enough. I had to use all this negative shit that was making me weak and horrible as a person. I had to use this as the power that now fueled me. I had to flip it on its head and say, hold up. This might be exactly what I need. The darkness is exactly what I need. It's how you look at your situation. And I was looking at it all fucked up. Who on this fucking earth would still be going right now? You are. You are. I saw myself 6 months, a year later, wherever it's gonna take me to do it, I saw myself walking across that stage, getting that fucking certificate of graduation from Buds. And I was able to be there at 300 fucking pounds. And that feeling that I was nowhere near that fucking feeling, I was able to put myself there 1,000,000 times every fucking day. And that feeling of like, my God, that is gonna feel fucking amazing. That's what made me suffer. That's what allowed the pain to be real and say, this is worth it. I want to feel for this fucking next 18 months. It took me 18 fucking months to finally become a Navy SEAL, to finally, just get through Buds. 18 months, it's 6 months. It took me 18. That's what woke me up every fucking morning was, I'm gonna put myself through this much fucking pain and suffering for a few seconds. That's all it is. A few seconds of joy. And it's so fucking worth it, man. That's what people don't get. So I'm able to put myself at the finish line, even though I have no finish line, but at the finish line of an event before I even start the motherfucker to say, how are you gonna feel at the end of this?
And with that, let's transition into Jordan Peterson's examples on shadow work. And at the end of that, I'll have one last final example for you, probably the most detailed, or at least one of the most detailed in this series, and we'll close out from there.
A tremendous amount of what you might regard as shadow integration, which in the parlance of behavioral psychologists would be something like assertiveness training, right? It's training in how to stand up for yourself and for your, let's say, for your better self, which would be the self that you could use productively over a medium to long period of time that would be of use to you, but also of use to people around you. So it's a self that's bounded by the necessity of taking care of yourself, but also simultaneously taking care of the people around you. I think that the simplest way to start that work is to consult your resentment, it's easy to become bitter about life and to become angry because, of course, life is difficult and it's full of disappointments. If you're resentful, it basically means only one of two things. It either means you should grow up and quit whining and get on with your life, or it means that you're being subject to tyrannical forces of one form or another, maybe emanating from you, maybe a consequence of the natural environment, maybe a consequence of society. It either means that you're immature and that you should grow the hell up. And so you need to figure out how much of your resentment is that, and maybe allied with the desire to find other things or people to blame. But the other possible option is that you have something to say or do, right? Because you're in a situation where you're violating your own internal ethical standards and you're being required, pressured, let's to say things you don't believe or to do things that you believe to be wrong. And you need to start to strategize and plan how you can rectify that so that you can say what you mean. Well, the first thing is you have to take note of that, right? To see that you're actually unhappy. The second is that you have to be willing to engage in a certain amount of conflict, because in order to sort out what's disturbing you, you're going to have to lay your concerns out on the table and say, well, look, this is bothering me. You don't have to say, well, I'm right and you're wrong and you have to fix this. You have to say, well, I've noticed that this pattern of interaction or lack of interaction, say, in our relationship is making me resentful and angry. And the danger is passive aggressiveness. You're not going to respond to your partner positively when they do something good if you're resentful about them. And you're not going to respond to yourself properly. And so you have to lay it out on the table, but sort of in a spirit of ignorant humility. It's like, look, I'm frustrated. I'm feeling this way about our relationship. Here's what I think might be going wrong, maybe on my part and maybe on your part. And here's what I envision as a possible solution. That's also really necessary if you're going to say what you have to say, which is to manifest yourself properly in the world. Is you can't just complain about what's wrong. You have to think, well, what would my minimal preconditions for satisfaction be? You have to offer that to the person that you're negotiating with. You're not storing up a whole sequence of memories about how you were unfairly treated and abused and betrayed. Instead, you're trying to stay on top of it and to note your unhappiness and dissatisfaction when it manifests itself, and to accept that that's the case, and then to analyze that to see if it's your problem, like I said, with regards to maturity, or if it indicates that there's an injustice in the manner in which you and the world are interacting, and then to work to set that right, even in small ways. And so it's a matter of characterological development, and that makes you stronger over time. And partly what you need, in order to do that is you have to really understand, and we do this is why we built, in the future authoring program, we built this section where you have to outline your most dismal future, right? What your future would be like if you let all your bad habits and characterological weaknesses have the upper hand. And the reason we did this is because you can't straighten yourself out merely as a consequence of hope. Let's say you lay out a vision for the future and you think about what your life would be, what you'd like your life to be like. And then that makes you hopeful and it motivates you because it gives you something worthwhile and higher order to work for, right? And that's useful. That's positive emotion working for you, because positive emotion is experienced in relationship to goals. But it's not as useful as also being chased by something you're terrified by. And if you have a good sense of how you'd fall apart if you stayed weak, and just exactly what kind of hell that would be, then when you determine to do something, like to tell the truth and to say what you think and to not do things that you hate, then you're going to be pulled along by the purpose that your vision has provided for you, but also pushed along by your desire to avoid the worst forms of hell that you've already outlined for yourself personally.
And here's one more example. Listen, accept, and let it out. Those are the steps to integrate, slowly but surely, the things in your shadow. Let's say you have identified a shadow aspect. You're selfish, and you're needy. And you've buried that deep in your shadow. You suppress it with generosity, and overabundance of generosity. Your conscious compensation is to prove how unselfish you are in a wide variety of ways. You're always the one paying for everybody's meals, volunteering at your church or whatever group or community you belong to, without any expectation. At least that's what it seems like. From the outside looking in, you're well on your way to being the servant of all Christ told his disciples about. But you're not exactly the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. This part of your personality grew and manifested to cover that dark, unmet need. And now it lurks in the oceanic depths of your unconscious mind, growing, smoldering, talons slowly rising from the deep, waiting for the ideal moment of weakness when it can burst out unrestrained to latch onto and smother those you love most. And when the deed is done, and the relationship has been choked and suffocated into oblivion, only then do you realize it was you this whole time. It's your fault, because the shadow is you. But you decide to give your selfish neediness a voice of sorts. You respect that part of you and assume it has something to teach you. You listen to that dark part of you without contempt or shame, or at least as little of it as possible. And not only do you listen, you let that part of you out into the world. You start expressing your needs to the people you love, taking small steps and letting just a little out at a time. You tell your husband or your wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, that you like to spend more quality time together, for example. Something like that. They respond well and provide those needs, imperfectly, but it's enough. You soon notice that the demanding, smothering clinginess that used to bubble up out of you uncontrollably has gone because you're meeting an actual survival mode sort of need. That happens a lot, by the way. Shadow traits or aspects often emerge as a survival mechanism. The neediness, in this case, being a drive to get something like love or respect or admiration or acceptance. So what happened there? Well, you gave your shadow aspect a voice. You listened, and you let it bubble up and out, bit by bit. You didn't outright reject that part of you, but you accepted it instead, flaws and all, understanding that if you brought it into the light and let it out properly, instead of shoving it down into the depths to fester and grow into an uncontrollable monster, it would eventually become healthy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of this video. That's all I got. I will see you in the next one.
And then to seek for solutions is quite stressful in the short term. And it's really easy to avoid. And so people avoid it all the time. And then they store up grievances across the span of their relationships. And eventually the grievances mount to the point where they return in monstrous form and just eat everything up. That's where you get divorces, or that's where you explode at your boss and end up fired, or that's where you develop high blood pressure over 15 years because you can't stand all the accumulated monsters in your closet, and then you drink yourself into oblivion because you can't stand your life. That's all, very counterproductive. But it's easy to avoid that necessary conflict on a moment-to-moment basis because it's very stressful to speak forthrightly about genuine conflicts, especially when you're dealing with important parts of your life. But otherwise you don't straighten them out, and then you have to carry all that forward. So you need to be terrified of the consequences of not speaking your piece. And that can counterbalance the terror of actually trying to have a conversation. So, and you also have to look with regards to the shadow ideas, like you have to get in touch with the depths of your anger. Jung said, well, the human shadow extends all the way down to hell. And he really meant that, because all the terrible things that people are motivated to do are associated with that shadow domain. And none of you are saints in any likelihood. You have a terrible capacity for destructiveness. And when you start to consult your resentment and to see how angry you are, it can terrify you to see the depths of that anger. Sometimes that'll manifest itself in very destructive fantasies, which you might not want to become conscious of because they're so brutal, let's say, and so aggressive that you can't even believe that you generate them, the nice person that's you.
Take your preoccupation with suffering seriously. It's a serious business. Right? And that's part of that, to circle back to the beginning, let's say, that's that willingness to gaze into the abyss, which is obviously what you were doing when you went to Ukraine. It's like, it's gazing into the abyss that makes you better. The thing is, and this is maybe where Nietzsche's idea is not as differentiated as it became. Sometimes your gaze can be forcefully directed towards the abyss, and then you're traumatized. If it's involuntary and accidental, it can kill you. The more it's voluntary, the more transformative it is. And that's part of that idea about facing death and hell. It's like, can you tolerate death and hell? And the answer is, this terrible answer is, yes, to the degree that you're willing to do it voluntarily. And then you might ask, well, why should I have to subject myself to death and hell? I'm innocent. And then the answer to that is, even the innocent must be voluntarily sacrificed to the highest good.